Well, good late morning to everyone. It's nice to have coffee hour down here that we can just sort of like get little treats.
Makes so much sense.
So, as I said, the first week, that the way I slice the pie of Mark's gospel is in three parts. The first one being Jesus starting his ministry, takes place mostly in Galilee, goes about teaching, proclaiming the kingdom of God, beginning at the baptism of John. Oh yes, more Bibles, wonderful. Thank you.
Can you pass these down, please? I can't put it in there.
And then
Do you have one?
I think we're set there with that on that side of things. Well, I think yes, exactly, just in case somebody comes in, which we know happens.
What just so happened? No, that's no.
So yeah, so now that they're here, we can just leave them there, which is where I think they were initially, many moons ago, when we were doing the Lenten class, actually.
What are your socks?
Oh, that's my socks, huh? Okay. They're little dog socks.
Yes.
The life of the party.
Wow. Dogs does that.
So anyway, we the first section is Jesus' ministry in Galilee, proclaiming the kingdom of God. Remember, the first line is the good news, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ. And then John the Baptist comes on the scene, and Jesus is baptized, and that's the sort of the inauguration of his ministry. He's baptized in the River Jordan by John. The voice says, "This is my beloved, in whom I'm well pleased." Then he's off to his ministry throughout Galilee, which, remember, in our imaginary map, Galilee is in the north, and Judah and Judea is in the south, where Jerusalem is. Jerusalem in that area is sort of the more populous, more elite area. Galilee is sort of the backwater. It's the country towns. And I mentioned one, I think it was the first week, maybe the second week, for those who went to the Holy Land, and a few folks have been to the Holy Land, that if you go to Nazareth today, it's a city. In the time of Jesus, it wouldn't have been a city, it was a little town. And so Jesus comes from sort of the backwater. But incidentally, I'll just throw this in for fun fact to know and tell. Not far from Nazareth, there's another town called Sepphoris. Has anybody been to Sepphoris? Who's been to the Holy Land? Anybody remember being in Sepphoris? Sepphoris is a very cosmopolitan sort of city. It's in the Galilee, but it's not a Jewish city at all. It was a completely Gentile city. Now, some Jews probably lived there, but they were sort of assimilated Jews, right? But Sepphoris was a place where there was a lot of construction going on in the time of Jesus' life. So it is thought by some people that the reason that Joseph and Mary settle in Nazareth, it's also Mary's hometown, was because there's probably a lot of work for Joseph as a craftsman in Sepphoris. So it could very well be, even though Sepphoris never is mentioned in the New Testament, could very well be that Joseph worked there. Maybe Jesus as a boy worked there too. Who knows? Nobody knows. The word we always think of Joseph as being a carpenter, right? We hear that he's a carpenter. Well, there's not a lot of wood in the Holy Land, right? It's mostly stone. So the Greek word is tekton, and that's just basically a craftsman. So he was kind of like maybe more like a handyman, maybe, or a stonemason, or a tradesman. A tradesman would be a good word, right? Yeah. That's who Joseph would have been, right? So anyway, that's where Jesus grows up. This is where he does his initial ministry. That was, I got off on a tangent there. Then the shorter middle section of the Gospel of Mark, as I'm dividing it, is on the way to Jerusalem. The first question that is asked in the first part of the book is, who is Jesus? The second section begins to answer that question because it begins with St. Peter's affirmation that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Right, but we're not quite sure what that all means. Peter doesn't get it, even though he says that Jesus is the Messiah. Doesn't get what Jesus' understanding of Messiah is going to be. It's going to be different from what Peter anticipated. In fact, it's going to entail the cross. And then Jesus says in Mark's gospel, if you don't take up the cross, you're not going to be my disciple. So then they go off to Jerusalem. The last time we met, which was now 2 weeks ago now, we ended with the story of Bartimaeus, blind Bartimaeus, who throws off his beggar's cloak and runs to Jesus and follows him on the way. If you remember, we said that there's a good possibility that Mark spent so much time talking about the name Bartimaeus because Timaeus is a Platonic dialogue that would have been well known to to average educated people learning in the classical Roman system of education. And if in fact this is a gospel that was written at Rome, it could very well be that Mark is saying that this guy Bartimaeus, isn't that interesting that he is somebody who is a seeker in the Platonic dialogue, Timaeus, and he goes and follows Jesus. So it's a reference, perhaps to the Gentiles coming into the faith, right? So if we see this gospel written at Rome in the first century in a mixed congregation of both Jews and Gentiles, this could very well be the case that he's inviting Gentiles to come into the sphere of the community of Christ as well, the followers of Jesus. But that's how section 2 ends, because right after that, 11:1 is we start the triumphal entry into Jerusalem on what we call Palm Sunday. But if we look at the 11th chapter of Mark, we'll see that we're going to jump right into the entry into Jerusalem. What's sometimes called the triumphal entry. But you will see, if we look at this, 11:1, when they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethany, near the Mount of Olives, this is like very close to Jerusalem, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, why are you doing this? Just say this, the Lord needs it, and we'll send it back here immediately. They went away and found the colt tied near a door outside the street. And as they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, what are you doing untying that colt? They told him what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. And many people spread their cloaks in the road, and many others spread leafy branches that they had cut in the fields. Then those who went ahead and those who were following were shouting, Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David, Hosanna in the highest. So we don't see in Mark's version, we don't see palms on Palm Sunday. We just see leafy branches. The only evangelist who actually specifies palms and how we get Palm Sunday is John's gospel. John says palms. Everybody else says like branches and leafy branches that they found in the fields. But John does specify palms. So we have this procession. They enter Jerusalem, and I'm going to repeat something I think I said when I believe we talked about this, I think, in the Lenten class. Could be wrong, but if I'm repeating myself, I'll repeat myself because some people are not here perhaps that were there. And that is that Marcus Borg and Dominic Crossan, two biblical scholars with whom I don't usually hold a lot of, I just agree with them on many things, let's put it that way. But they wrote this excellent book called The Last Week that I would highly recommend. And it's about these chapters of John's Gospel. Why do we keep saying John? Mark's Gospel. And what they do is they outline for the reader how these last chapters, 11 through 16, go day by day. You can follow the way that it works in the last week. Then the next morning, this, and then the next morning did that. So you can follow each day of Holy Week in Mark's Gospel because he lays it out as if it were an entire week. Now, mind you, Mark up to this point has 42 times been saying immediately. There's all this like movement, like right. We're moving very quickly, but the minute we get here, the action slows down narratively to the last third of the gospel taking place only in 1 week. And then the narrative slows down even more on the last night and day of Jesus' life. So you have this almost careening movement up to this week, and then the action slows down. And this is just in terms of the narrative itself. And then it slows down even more, as I say, in the final night and next day of Monday, what we call Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday. But as Jesus is entering Jerusalem, this is in a sense a religious and political protest march, I guess we could call it, because Jesus he's riding on a colt, which if we went to the book of Zechariah, chapter 9, you don't have to look this up if you don't want to, but if you're good at Bible drills, look up here Zechariah. If you find out how many went to vacation Bible school as a child or whatever. But Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you, triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall command peace to the nations. His dominion shall be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. So this is a messianic promise, a promise of the coming Messiah. What's he going to be like? He's going to bring in a reign of peace, shalom, and justice, not of the war horse in Jerusalem. Now, if we were to take what Crossan and Borg say seriously, and I think this might very well be the case. What we know about Pontius Pilate, and again, I know I'm repeating myself because I know I've said this before. Pontius Pilate would have lived, he wouldn't have stayed in Jerusalem all the time, even though Jerusalem is, the capital. He would have stayed at the much more posh Caesarea Maritima, or what I like to call Caesarea by the sea. It's a resort town, beautiful port. In that day, it was a beautiful port, very wealthy, completely Hellenized. That means it's a Gentile Roman city. So he doesn't have to put up with, all the Jewish rules and all that sort of thing. It's totally a Gentile city. That's where he would have made his normal place to stay. However, when there's a feast like Passover coming, which is very volatile and can be a time of potential revolt, you have to show the power of Rome. And so Pilate would definitely have gone into the city of Jerusalem near Passover time. because he has to show that, even though this feast that you're celebrating talks about being liberated from your oppressors, that's not going to happen anytime soon here because we're in charge. So what would have happened, and we know that this is the case in terms of what Rome would do in situations like this, is that he would come from Caesarea Maritima or Caesarea by the Sea with a garrison, legion of soldiers, however many soldiers, in full parade attire and with drums and trumpets and armor and big horses, war horses, banners, that you've seen the things in the movie, the SPQR, sent to the people of Rome, and eagles and all that sort of stuff. And to come into town, letting people know that who's in charge. The war horse is in charge, right? The Roman military power is in charge. And he would have come in from the opposite end of the city, near where the rich part of the city was. If you divide Jerusalem at the time of Jesus in half, there's the upper city and the lower city. The upper city is where all the wealthy folks live. Lower city is where the not so wealthy folks live. And the temple sort of in between over here. And so Pilate would have come into the city through the northern part and displayed all the power of Rome. But Borgen and Crossan suggest that Jesus' entry is a counter protest to what was going on up there in the top. That here is Jesus coming in on a donkey, which was actually a beast of that would be used for the kings of Israel used to ride on donkeys in David's day. So he's taking an ancient symbol of the kingship of Israel and also reflecting here in Mark on the prophecy of Zechariah that I'm coming. You're seeing what's going on up there. That's not what I'm about. I'm about something different. I'm about bringing a reign of shalom, of God's shalom, God's peace. And that's the kind of Messiah that I'm going to be. And I'm going to confront the powers of Rome, not with their own tools, but with a whole other way of being, right? Because as I think it's Bell Hooks said, you can't use the master's tool to tear down the master's house. And Jesus clearly believed that. And we're going to meditate a little bit further on this as we go on and look at it, how this, anyways, we'll talk about it as we go further. So there's a triumphal entry, right? So he comes into the city. People shout Hosanna, which means Lord save us. That's what Hosanna means. Hosanna in the highest heaven. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. So what are they thinking of? What are they thinking of, right? Are they thinking that it's going to be a kingdom of shalom and peace and joy and the kingdom of God coming in, maybe? Or are they thinking, yes, now is the time when we're going to be able to overthrow these Roman oppressors. And here's the guy that's going to be the catalyst to do it. Probably some of both, because there wasn't only one messianic expectation. That's the other thing. Like in Second Temple Judaism, which is what we're talking about here, right? The time after the exile, there were lots of different understandings of what the Messiah would be, right? I mean, one of them would be the zealot Messiah, right? The one who's going to come and destroy Rome and bring in a new political reality based on revolution. Right? Another was the one like the Essenes believed in, which is they were a sectarian group who lived out in the desert, as you might know, and well, some of them also lived in the city as well. But they believed that the entire religious system of Jerusalem was utterly and completely corrupt and needed to be overthrown. And that the Messiah was going to be the one who was going to come and inaugurate a new religious system from the temple in Jerusalem. And so there was another vision of the Messiah. The Messiah of a reign of eternal peace. That's another vision of the Messiah, right? And that seems to be the one that Jesus is thinking about when he enters the city of Jerusalem. Is this new era of peace and justice would be inaugurated in his coming. Now, Jewish folks at the time of Jesus, after Jesus' death and his resurrection, as proclaimed by the early Christians, would have said, well, that's all well and good, but that didn't happen. The Messiah didn't come because he didn't bring in this reign of peace. And so why should we believe in this Messiah? Because it didn't happen, So we can understand why Jewish folks did not immediately embrace all of this, right? Because as far as they could see, it didn't happen. But as Christians, what we believe is that Jesus inaugurated this new age, but did not complete it, right? Anyway, so that's the entry into the temple, into Jerusalem. And we'll before we stop for any questions, comments, and observations, let's just go through this next little section here where Jesus cleanses the temple, right? This is a famous story. It happens here after Jesus enters the city of Jerusalem in Mark, Matthew, and Luke. John has a cleansing of the temple story, but it happens in chapter 2 for John. He does it at the very beginning of the gospel, right? But in the synoptics or the other 3 gospels, it happens here. So Jesus comes into the temple, and then they came to Jerusalem. Let's see, on the following day, right? So that's not in verse 12. On the following day, so he enters, say Sunday, right? Triumphal entry. Monday, he goes back into the city. He has this weird story of cursing the fig tree, and the disciples say, "Well, it's not the season for figs." And he said, "Well, may no one ever eat fruit from you ever again." And his disciples heard that he had said that. So strange story, right? But then he comes into the temple, comes into Jerusalem, and he enters the temple, and he begins to drive out those who were selling, and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves, and he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." And then the chief priests are upset by this, obviously, and they are even more intent on plotting to kill him. So what's all this about, this temple cleansing? One of the things that we know happened in 30 AD, which in all likelihood is the year that this takes place, is that although the buying and selling of things for sacrifice used to take place on the Mount of Olives, it was authorized to take place within the temple precincts. Oops, somebody grabbed their phone. In 30 AD. So it could have been, this is a new thing that has just been invented that you can now, for your shopping convenience, you can get your sacrifices right here on Temple Mount, one-stop shopping again, right? So you don't have to go out to the anymore to the Mount of Olives, and you can buy all your stuff that you need for the sacrifices and whatever you need right here. And of course you had to change your coins because you couldn't have what would it do you remember the story? Tell this. Do you remember the story in the Gospels about when they asked for a coin, right? When they asked, should we pay taxes to Caesar, right? And what happens?
Jesus said, look at the coin. Who's the head?
Whose head on it, right? And whose head was on it?
Caesar.
Okay. But you can't have that in the temple. You can't have an image, a graven image, especially of an emperor who calls himself a god. And in fact, the coin even probably would have on it, at least like Augustus had this all the time. Filii Dei, right? Son of God, Augustus, the son of God. That's not at all kosher. So you have to change your coins before you can buy anything that you would need to use in the temple. You have to exchange them for temple coins at a convenience fee, of course, right? So this is a way of making money, right, as well. So apparently Jesus sees all of this and is like really not hot on it very much, right? So and he overthrows all these. It probably was not sort of like as huge a deal as we imagine in our minds, right? Because there's probably a big enterprise going on, and he comes in and he does this ritual or act of political protest and religious protest, and it could very well be Tom Wright, Bishop Tom Wright, who is excellent Anglican biblical scholar, says that what doing that would have been to disrupt the temple sacrificial system for a period of time. That is, it would have like stalled the process by which sacrifices would be brought to be made at the altar and that sort of thing. So it's not as if Jesus is stopping it totally, but he's making a protest to stop it for a little while. And so the other thing of that is, it's not just that it's this like mercantile system, because you needed to have a mercantile system to be able to offer the appointed sacrifices, that you couldn't bring your goat from Galilee to the temple or your sheep from Galilee to the temple. It had to be a pure and unblemished animal, and you would risk a lot by taking an animal all that way. So it makes sense that you procure the animals that were needed for the temple sacrifices nearby, right, rather than bringing them from wherever you are. So it isn't as if that in and of itself is the problem. It's the connection between the political system and the economic system and the religious system and the intersection of all of those things that Jesus seems to be protesting. So anyway, where was I going with all of that? So that seems to be what the protest is about in the temple, and obviously those folks who are have the most to gain from all of this are going to not be happy about that, right? And what Jesus seems also to be saying is that all of this stuff about the temple and Jerusalem that you're so trying to grab onto is all going to be lost soon anyway. That this whole system, not unlike the Essenes, is rotten root and branch, and the whole thing's going to collapse down on itself sooner rather than later. We're going to see this a little bit here as we go on with the fig tree then because there's it's what's sometimes called the Markan sandwich. Mark has this happens several times. We saw it in the woman who when Jesus is going to heal the synagogue leader Jairus's daughter, and he's interrupted by the woman with the 12 years of hemorrhaging, and heals her. And then he continues on with the story of Jairus's daughter who dies and is brought back to life. The two sides of that story have an intervening piece. So here we have the cursing of the fig tree, then we have the cleansing of the temple. And then we have the rest of the story of the fig tree. So in 11:12, we have the cursing of the fig tree. Starting in 15, we have the cleansing of the temple. And then starting in 20, we go back to the story of the withered fig tree. On the morning as they passed by, they saw the fig tree withered to its roots. And Peter remembered and said, Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed is withered. Jesus answered them, have faith in God. Truly, I tell you, say to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and it will be done for you. So I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you receive, and it will be yours. So why is it that this fig tree is on both sides of the story of the temple? Could be the case that the fig tree is the sign of Israel and its fruitfulness, and it is no longer fruitful. And he goes in the temple. The temple is no longer fruitful. The religious system is not life-giving anymore, but is death-dealing. And so, like the fig tree, it will come to an end. And so we're going to skip some of this. We can't read all of it, obviously. We have a little hour here, so we're going to skip some of it. Commend it to your reading. We're going to go on to the widow's offering. We're going to continue this little theme about the temple in chapter 12, verse 41. And by the way, one thing that you could do would be to read chapters 11 through 16 and look to see how Mark marks each day. And you can, he clearly lays that out, the next morning, that sort of thing. But let's look at the widow's offering in verse 41 of chapter 12. He sat down opposite the treasury, again in the temple, and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For, I think there's a typo here. For, what do you have for verse 44? Anybody who does not have this Bible?
For all of them.
For all of them. For an of them is what our little Bible
And
says.
this says, for those others who have given more than enough.
Right.
No,
Or they have all contributed.
Right. So there's a typo. If you have this Bible, this is the this particular version of the NRSV has a typo. It says for an of them. I believe it should read for all of them have contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. And let's continue on. As he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings. Then Jesus asked him, do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down. So, again, his critique of the temple. And he's talking about this widow's offering. This poor widow is giving. Now you can look at the story in 2 different ways, right? I mean, one is often used in stewardship season, isn't it? Right? In churches where just what matters is the how much you give of what you have. It doesn't the absolute amount isn't the important thing, is but what you are giving sacrificially from the fruit of your life and labor. And that's fine, but it might be that there's something more at work here, that this widow felt as if she had to do this, right, to be right with God, that it was the way that she could become like a better daughter of Israel, that this is what God required of her, to give what little she had to live on, because that's what had to happen. And there was nobody telling her, no, you don't have to do that, you know. And so could it be the fact that this is also a critique of the whole religious system, which is involved with Rome, the Sadducees, which are the elite priestly class, are totally enmeshed with the political system of Rome and highly benefiting from it. So Jesus is making a critique here that, yes, she gave more than everybody else, everything she had to live on. And maybe that's a critique of what this whole system is, that this woman feels she has to do that.
That's interesting.
And so then he walks out. Notice what he does. He walks out of the temple and he doesn't come back into the temple after that. And they, oh, look, all these beautiful stones. It's one of the temple in Jerusalem is one of the wonders of the ancient world. Oh, how beautiful. Yeah, well, no, it's corrupt root and branch is what Jesus seems to be saying here, right? The whole thing is going to come toppling down. And we know in 70, it does actually do that. Let's take a little excursus then on to the Rome of the gospel writer Mark's time. If in fact this gospel was written in the late 60s, say maybe 67, like or maybe as late as 70 or close to 70, it's still going to be predating the fall, probably predating the fall of Jerusalem. And so, but what it's not predating is the Jewish War, which begins in 63. There's a revolt against Pompey, is raising taxes, and the power of Rome is coming down like gangbusters on the Jewish people. And there's a zealot revolt begins. Exactly what Jesus is saying not to do, right? And this is going hot and heavy at this time, if this in fact is being written during the time of Nero in the 60s. The Jewish revolt is fully on, and it almost looks like they're going to win, in fact, because the Jewish revolutionaries push out the Romans from Jerusalem for a time, and they seem like they're winning, but then they come on back in absolute force, and come in and lay siege to Jerusalem, and then finally by the year 70. Completely overtake the city again. The temple is utterly and completely destroyed, just like what Jesus predicts here. Not one stone left on another. It's flattened. The temple's destroyed. The sacrificial system is ruined. Have you ever seen the Arch of Titus? Titus was the general, by the way, that was the successful general who squelched this upstart revolution in Jerusalem and Judah. There's a wonderful, if you ever go to Rome and if you've seen the Arch of Titus, the Arch of Titus is from classical times, dates to the first century, to this period we're talking about. And on the interior of the Arch of Titus, there's a commemoration of a triumph. A triumph would happen in Rome whenever somebody was specific, like specially conquered an area, and it was a great feat that they had done, and they want to honor the general. So they would bring all the spoils of war into the city of Rome, along with all of the slaves that were captured from there, and sometimes the king. And the Arch of Titus commemorates the triumphal entry into the city of Jerusalem with all the spoil, all the goods of the temple. The most famous scene on the frieze of the interior of the arch is the huge golden menorah from the temple in Jerusalem. You can see that even today. If you look up Google Arch of Titus, use your Google machine, and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Rome was totally destroyed, just as Jesus foretold, that the people who kill Jesus, especially the Sadducees, who are the priestly elite, think that if they can just keep things calm with the Romans, everything's going to be okay. And Jesus is saying, no, this is not going to be okay. You are in a politically and spiritually untenable situation. This is all going to come to an end. And so some people say, well, this indicates that this happened after the fall of Jerusalem, but it doesn't have to be that at all. In fact, it could be that Jesus is an astute. You don't have to be a weatherman. What was that old 60s saying? To know the way the wind blows, right? So that could be the case. So then honorable mention, since we're moving along here, there's this odd little section that's sometimes called the Apocalypse of Mark. That is, he has all these like weird things about, when you see this happening, this desolating sacrilege, et cetera, using images from the book of Daniel. So kind of a weird section, but we don't have time really to go into that. That would be in chapter 13, beginning in verse 14. That we're doing that by honorable mention. But then he goes back to the fig tree again, the lesson of the fig tree in 28. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. So Jesus is making a prediction that this is going to happen in the near future.
Okay.
So then we're going to move. Again, we don't have huge amounts of time today, but we move into the last night before Jesus is crucified. We have the giving of the Lord's Supper and Peter's famous denial, and Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane and his betrayal. And then Jesus comes before Pilate, and then he is crucified. So in 15, let's look at that, verse 21, after Jesus is condemned to death, they compelled the passerby who was coming in from the country to carry his cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Then they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his clothes among them, casting lots to decide what each should take. It was 9:00 in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified two bandits, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, were also mocking him among themselves and saying, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now so that he may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also taunted him. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3:00 in the afternoon. At 3:00, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "Listen, he's calling on Elijah." And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine and put it on a stick and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let's see whether Elijah will come and save him or take him down." Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now, when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last. He said, truly, this man was God's son. There were also women looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James the younger, and of Joses and Salome. These used to follow him and provided for him when he was in Galilee. And there were many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem. So, first of all, one thing to think about here, and you can also interrupt me at any point, by the way, because as I always say, I'll prattle on unless someone stops me. Notice how time is slowing down, right? We had immediately, all through this gospel. Then we have every day of the week. And now at this very last day, it's hour by hour, right, is being documented here. So we have 9 o'clock in the morning, then it was noon, then it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So time is slowing down to a stop. Time the way we know it, the old time of the old world, of the old universe, right? But the time of the new universe is just about to begin. So Jesus cries out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, from the 22nd Psalm, right? If you were here by any chance on Maundy Thursday, at the end of the service, when we stripped the altar, the choir sang the 22nd Psalm. Did I say the 23rd Psalm? I meant the 22nd Psalm, which begins, my God, why have you forsaken me? Far from my cry, far from the voice of my longing. So isn't that something that Jesus goes to his cross, and at least as Mark tells the story, and maybe from Peter telling him the story, he cries out in utter dereliction. And the last word he says is, my God, why have you forsaken me? So Jesus goes to the cross. He believes that he is doing this as a mission of God, that he is God's anointed from his baptism at the River Jordan through his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, taking all the way to the cross. And here he is at the cross. And maybe the historical figure of Jesus is wondering at the very last, was this all wrong? Oh my God, I am going to die. Why have you forsaken me? And he's only vindicated after the end. Right? So at least that's the way, if we read some of the other gospels, especially John, we get a different twist on things, right? John gives us a different, Jesus seems to be more in command of the situation, let's say, in John's gospel. But in Mark, there's a visceral nature to the story here, right? Of Jesus at the very end, not knowing, is this really going to be true? It reminds me of Nicholas Kasanikis' Last Temptation of Christ, right? I don't know if you ever saw that film or read the book. It has Jesus is on the cross, and the last temptation is that Satan comes to him and says, if you only had listened to me. And he shows him what he could have had he not taken this way. He shows him his home in Nazareth with grandchildren and his lovely wife and his children and everybody around him when he dies, and wouldn't that have been a wonderful life? But you choose this instead. I warned you. And you got to think that there's something of that here in this story. There is such an immediacy to his suffering that we don't necessarily maybe get in the other gospels. What's that? That hymn, "O Sacred Head Surrounded," right? There's that one verse, and I'm not going to remember it, I don't think fully, but that that it's the prayer of the person singing the hymn, that that we ask for God's help or Jesus' help, that we quail not in our last hour. That when that time comes for us, that we will be able to have the confidence that we will be able to deliver over our spirit in faith, that there'll be something on the other side, and that I think is sort of something what's at work here in this text for
Why do you
us.
think theologically this is included?
Say more about what your question
Well, what
is.
I mean is why are there the differences in the emphasis of the gospel? What does that mean?
Mhm. Well, I mean, I think you could answer it in a variety of ways. One is that it could be that Mark's gospel, if in fact it is the first, which almost everybody believes, it had more of an immediacy with the actual people who are telling the story about what happened, and it has less theological embroidery, let's say, as some of the other ones might have had over a little bit more time, and they want to tell the story in a particular way. Another is maybe that in Mark's gospel, like everything through a lot of this is like lack of understanding, fear, failure. All the disciples fail, right? And we're going to see in a little while the resurrection story isn't quite what we would hope it would be. It all, like, it seems like we have this vision of the future, but we fail in it, and even Jesus wasn't sure at the very end,
I think it introduces doubt and in a way that helps people understand that doubt is part of faith.
Mhm. Yeah. Even if we looked at the rest of that psalm, and I think Psalm 22 really informs all of this, he goes on to say, and yet you are the one who inhabits the praises of Israel. You knew me from my mother's womb. And he at the end of Psalm 22, it's what, well, let's take a look at Psalm 22. I mean, if you were to read this, you could see how the early church would have read back into this psalm the Passion of Jesus, right? Now, once again, I want us to be aware when using the Old Testament that what we are doing interpretively is we are reading back into the text from our Christian experience, right? That it isn't as if, the psalmist was in some kind of trance and had this vision of the cross or something like that, right? That the early church is reading back into the scriptures of Israel, their experience of Jesus as the Messiah. If as we go along, things like, many dogs surround me, I am a worm and no man, many bulls encircle me, they open wide their mouths, I am poured out like water, all my bones are out of joint, my heart is like wax. For dogs are all around me, a company of evildoers encircles me, my hands are feet and shriveled, I can count all my bones, they stare and gloat over me and divide my clothes among them and pour my clothing, they cast lots. But you, O Lord, do not be far away. O my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion, from the horns of the wild oxen. You have rescued me. And then in the end, it turns into a hymn of praise. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord. All the families of the nation shall worship before him. For dominion belongs to the Lord. He rules over the nations, etc. So it's a psalm that begins in lament and ends in praise, right? So we can also see that in Jesus, saying this psalm. It's not only a psalm of lament, but it also is a psalm that ends finally in faith.
I I wanted to share something I was taught as a child about this my God, why do you abandon me" passage. It was pointed out to me by a Sunday school teacher that the crowd around him on the cross that has not yet figured out that he's the Messiah would have had this memorized, right? They would have known Psalm 22 by heart.
Yes.
So when he cries out the first couple lines, they'd be running through it in their head, and they'd be looking around them and seeing everything here playing out in front of them. They'd see, they just said, "Why don't you save yourself?" Somebody over there is casting lots for his clothes. His throat's dry, he's crying out for something to drink. Like literally everything is happening. And they're slowly realizing this is what's been prophesied. And then shortly thereafter in the Gospel of Mark, they say, "Surely this was the Son of God." Like the crowd's slowly starting to catch on. So maybe part of why he's crying out in despair is what we've been talking about, but maybe part of it is for the sake of the people around him,
right?
To sort of catch on.
And even he himself is knowing the whole song, right?
Right.
So he cries out in dereliction, but even here, I will hope, right? I cannot give up hope because I believe you will rescue me, right? So even Jesus is calling out that song and would have known that whole song. You're absolutely right about that, right? They would have known that song. But what's interesting about what you suggest is that but remember, the one who says that is no Jew. It's a centurion.
Oh, that's a good point.
So isn't that something that the only one who recognizes what's going on here is a Roman oppressor,
Right.
who finally gets it, right? And if this gospel, in fact, is being written in Rome to a mixed group of Gentiles and Jews, Romans and non-Romans, it could very well be that it's to show that even you all can become part of this, right? And even somebody like a centurion, somebody who's actually crucified him, can be redeemed.
Well, I'm thinking too, it's at our greatest loss and vulnerability when you're saved. I think it's very human. Why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
And that's when things often turn around. And you're open up to something.
Yes.
Bigger.
I along with that, just not only is it foretelling everything, but Jesus is actually feeling that. I mean, the whole identify with Jesus being human is to feel what we feel at our lowest point, and not just kind of be in that position and tell us this is, how to read the scriptures and to look for faith, but to actually have that experience, to come down and be feeling what humanity goes through in their worst moments, and then to have what comes next, to be able to, knowing that was going to come, to put yourself there just so that you could then say, I was there, I know, and this is not the end, and there's more to it, and God is there even in this most horrible moments of life, is much more powerful for us as just going through all the difficulties in life, to actually say he was there and felt that. And so to me, this one is much more powerful than the more like in John, where everything is just kind of playing out, because there's not that connection. And and then when you read back into it after everything, then you can put all the layers of theology there, but that like direct connection, that you can feel, that can help bring salvation because you can identify with him and go on, is in that moment of pain and knowing that he knows. And you know, like reading Hebrews afterwards, also like that whole,
Oh, yes.
you know, he is the high priest that comes and it's living it out in a way that then when you're at that rock bottom point, you have something you can grasp onto and identify with in a more meaningful way.
Yeah.
And I'm maybe I've been redundant with what you just said, but it's God's child. It's the human, God's suffering. It's
Yes.
watching his human child
Yes.
and this child.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's an excellent point that Jesus isn't here only as Jesus, but God is involved, in this too, right? And coming into the very heart of the worst that could be done that human beings can do, because that crucifixion is like, I don't know if any of you know of this wonderful preacher by the name of Fleming Rutledge, who I mean, she's quite old now, but she's like a rock star of preacher. But she, what was I going to say about her? What did she say? It totally left my mind now that I'm talking about her. What are we talking about?
How bad crucifixion is?
Oh, yes. Yeah, how bad crucifixion is. She says, and I think she's right, that the only thing like unto it is lynching trees in the southern United States, because it's very similar what they do. I mean, lynching, like crucifixion, was done in a public place, in part to be a spectacle, to be observed. You see all these people like are walking by, because crucifixion was always in a public place where people would walk by, right? Wasn't done often in secret someplace, and it was meant to dehumanize the victim, which is what lynching did too. To say that this is not a person, this is someone that we are going to totally dehumanize, humiliate, and murder. That's what crucifixion was supposed to do. And that's why the titulus on the top of the cross says, "The King of the Jews." See, you Jews, if you say that that this guy's a king, okay, look what we do to your king. And crucifixion was so disgusting in the ancient world that it was there are ancient Roman sources will say, please don't ever talk about crucifixion in polite company, and especially in the presence of women. It's just so, you would never talk about that. It's just sort of, it would be, the rudest thing to do at a dinner party, to talk about crucifixion. It's awful. It's not something we even talk about. I mean, this is so when we hear about taking up your cross, as we heard today and from Matthew, but we heard in Mark as well. This is not like something I wear a cross around my neck, right? But this is not that. It's not some little piece of gold. This is something of utter humiliation, and it was an imperial tool to just completely abase the victim. So to your point, Jesus goes to the absolute worst that people can do to one another, and goes literally to hell, right? We talk about the harrowing of hell. It goes down into the place of the dead, having that horrible suffering and death, and comes out the other side.
Why does he go to hell? Is it because he had doubt?
Well, because, I mean, when we say hell, that's in that should be in air quotes, right? Because it's the place, the abode of the dead. Sheol, for example, the place, in the Old Testament, Sheol is just the place where the dead are, right? And so the ancient church, very, very early on, talked about, what did Jesus do on Holy Saturday? A Good Friday night and Holy Saturday before Easter when he rose from the dead. Well, he was in the place of the dead, and he broke open let out all the prisoners free, because he tricked the devil into the devil thought he won, but oh no, the victor is down here below, and now I'm going to go and free everybody down there too. So you might have seen the wonderful Eastern Orthodox icons of Jesus grabbing the hand of Adam and Eve and pulling them out of the grave, right? I think I've mentioned that.
Well, it's in Dante's Inferno, I think, isn't it? Doesn't Dante say it is Inferno? Doesn't Dante pull?
Does he have that in there? Oh, he very well might. Yeah. And he pulls their hands out and brings them out of the grave, and all of the dead who have been waiting for this march out. And in the Orthodox icons, Jesus often has his sort of like foot on top of the devil, who's like there with it, and all of the chains are broken, and Adam and Eve are marching out. It's called the harrowing of hell. So you can use your Google machine on that one too. So find icons. You can use Eastern Orthodox icons of the resurrection or harrowing of hell, and you'll see artistic images of that. Image. Oh my gosh, we're late. But let's then Jesus is buried, right? 42 in 1542 and following, when evening had come, and since it was the day of preparation, that is the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, was also himself waiting expectantly for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate wondered if he were already dead, and summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he had been dead for some time. When he learned from the centurion that he was dead, he granted the body to Joseph. Then Joseph bought a linen cloth, and taking down the body, wrapped it in the linen cloth and laid it in the tomb that had been hewn out of the rock. He then rolled a stone against the door of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where the body was laid. Just a little excursus on the geography that we're talking about here. If you ever go to the Holy Land, and I would definitely recommend it if you have not, and you go to what the Western Christians call the Tomb of the Holy Sepulchre, what Eastern Christians call the Church of the Resurrection. Interesting. There's the place of Golgotha, the place of where Jesus was crucified. And not very far from it is what they call the Episcopal, the place where the little chapel that they have over the actual tomb of Jesus. You may have seen in National Geographic not too long ago that they had to totally redo that little chapel because it was falling down, and they excavated right down to the very bedrock and found that the actual tomb was really there, right? And they also know that it was an area where there were some other tombs. And there is this rock face nearby, and it does say that it's nearby, right? So because of the Sabbath, they couldn't go very far. So it, in all likelihood, the vast preponderance of the evidence is to say that the place where you can go today to visit the tomb of the resurrection, Golgotha and the resurrection, is the actual place where this actually happened. And I will go on about that at length if I were to have time, about how cool that is, and about what happened afterwards. That temple of Venus was placed was built on top of it after the destruction of Jerusalem. Why did they build the temple over that? Well, probably because Christians were venerating that spot. But anyways, I talk about, if you want to learn more about my musings on that, read the last chapter of my book. I go on at length about the morning star and all that. So anyways, so Jesus is buried in that place. But then this is what it is, the enigmatic ending of Mark's Gospel, chapter 16, verses 1 through 8. And then I promise we'll end soon. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. End of the story. Now, people in the early church didn't like that. That's why we have two different shorter endings of Mark's Gospel that were everyone pretty much, unless you were maybe like the craziest fundamentalist, is quite sure that this is where our original gospel ends. Now, why does he end here? Isn't it a strange thing? And in fact, it's so strange that in Greek, he ends with the what's that, preposition? For? Is it preposition? For is a conjunction, whatever it is. It ends with the word for. It's preposition, right? Yeah, okay. I thought so. Thought I was right the first time. He ends with for. Gar. And it's sort of, and it's a strange construction of the sentence, the way he ends it that way. It's like, it would be like we saying in English, and they were afraid for. It's kind of weird, right? Like, why would you end your sentence that way?
Because the story is yet to be
Because the story is yet to be told, right? Yes, you've been in too many of my classes. And he said, go back to Galilee, right? So where does the gospel begin? In Galilee. So you go back to the beginning, and now with new eyes, you read the whole gospel again. And you can read back and see, oh, now I get it, right? Because I no longer can see men like trees walking. Now I can see clearly, right? Like you remember that story of the blind man at the end of section 1, right? Now I know I can see clearly, and now I can read it with new eyes, with resurrection eyes, to see now that the risen Jesus, who's going through Galilee and going on to everything, going through this whole story, is walking on ahead of us. So that is the way Mark ends his story. Now, some people will say that, scrolls break at a certain point, and probably we just have we just don't have a scroll that's going to be, that there would have been the ending, but I don't think so. I think that Mark really is doing this for teaching purpose, because as I said, maybe even in these sessions here, that this is meant to be read aloud in a community. And so if I were reading this to you and I came to the end of it and I said, and they were afraid for, well, for what? What happened then? And well, you're here, aren't you? That couldn't have been the end of the story. Somebody must have told somebody, and now you have to go do it, right? So maybe that's a good way for us to end today, right? So somebody must have told something, and now it's our turn to do it. Christianity will die in a generation if we do not do what Mark asks us to do at the end of his gospel. Amen. Here we are. Yes. And we because of the insistence of Rosetta we're going to be meeting a week from
Yay.
this week on just a general conversation on biblical issues.
This next weekend.
Not next week, because that's 4th of July. And that's like, why tempt fate?
Right.
So,
A week after 4th of July.
yeah, but this class here, we're ending on Mark. We're going to talk about just generally Bible stuff on that final week.
Maybe you can explain the rest of the day.